Good morning, everybody. We are very proud to be here with Eric Schmidt and Tom Enders. I'd like to thank so many of you for joining us here in Paris and online for this very unusual, I'm tempted to say historic, debate on the eve of the Paris Air Show. It's been a long dream. It's long been a dream to get Tom Enders, the CEO of Airbus, and Eric Schmidt, the chairman of Google's parent Alphabet, on the same stage. And Paris Air Forum has finally made it happen. Each one of them is equally passionate about aerospace and technology and draws inspirations from aviation pioneers. The first, Tom Enders, has redefined his group to take account of the technological revolutions happening in California. The second, Eric Schmidt, personifies the extraordinary achievements and ambitions of Silicon Valley and the rise of companies known as the GAFA. And so it's with enormous interest that we look forward to what they have to tell us at a time where we are witnessing the third aerospace revolution. We're going to discuss that with Tom and Eric. I am joined by Tim Effer of Reuters, who has a much more good English than me for this discussion. And I have to tell you that it will take place in English, of course, and it's being streamed live on latribune.fr. Our hope is to understand during the discussion how an industry which is more than 100 year old can coexist in future with the much younger but very dynamic digital world. So, to start the conversation with you, Eric, Alphabet, Google, is present in most technologies which will determine our future. Big data, artificial intelligence, mobility, and so on. We would like to know what is your vision for the impact of all these technologies on industry in general, but especially in aerospace, and how do you cooperate with our aerospace industry?
Well, thank you both very much, and thank you, Tom, for helping me get here by virtue of your excellent products. We have a number of partnerships with Airbus, which I'm very excited about. And thanks to ADP and the other people who put this show on, I can't think of a more relevant topic than the digitization of a 100-year-old industry that's so fundamental as aviation. When I think about aviation, I think of a proud industry that doesn't use software very much. It does a lot of other things, but there's not a lot of software. And much of the software seems, if I may say, older to me. The cycles are old, the software interfaces are old, it hasn't changed very much. And I think there's an opportunity, both in our partnership with Airbus, but in other areas, to actually accelerate change by virtue of the use of software. And I should say that this is true in many, many industries, not just in aviation. Partly it's because we understand better how to build reliable, powerful computers that stay up and so forth today, but more importantly because there are new algorithmic improvements which are generally known as AI. And it's now possible, for example, for computers to do vision better than humans can. And so that ability to, for example, see more accurately has a lot of implications, for example, for self-driving cars, and maybe eventually for self-flying airplanes, drones, and that sort of thing.
Well, Eric, that's very interesting what you say about software. I mean, what would this industry look like, say, in Europe, with our very fragmented, rather old-fashioned air traffic control system, that sort of thing, if it had been designed, say, in the last 5 or 10 years, and companies like yours have been driving it?
Well, I'm a pilot, as you know, and I fly around Europe, and I don't understand why Europe is not one single route. And I don't understand why I have to constantly go from set to setup. Perhaps there are national reasons why people want to have different people, but why is the computer control system not one? This is one computer in our world. And yet here, it's billions of euros of money spent in an architecture that's very old. The same, by the way, is true in America, so it's not unique to Europe. And the reason I mention this is I think this is the first thing that should be worked on, because the improvements in air traffic control will yield very, very big improvements in airplane efficiency and climate change carbon emission. And I want to state as an American that most Americans believe climate change is true.
Well, Tom, let's just come to you. You've talked about the third revolution in aerospace. It's a very bold concept. Can you tell us what you mean by that? What technologies are driving that? What does it mean for Airbus?
Well, let me first come back to Eric's answer on air traffic management. We've done studies some years ago that show that if we had a single European sky, by the way, not even with the latest software and one computer, we could easily save 10% of the fuel burn in Europe, and that's huge.
Say it again.
10% of, yeah.
Any idea how much money that is?
Yeah, sure. Ask the airlines. Ask the airlines. I guess we have some here in the... And this is exactly why we, the airlines and the aeronautic industry, have been requesting governments for ages to please stop that fragmentation in Europe and build that single European sky. Best, of course, with a state-of-the-art computer, as you say, one computer software system. And maybe, now that we have a kind of a revival of Europe, largely thanks to President Macron, that's a topic that should be on the agenda for France, but for Europe all in all. Third revolution, yeah, I've been talking about that because I'm excited, Tim, about what I see as a convergence of technologies. You talk about automation, artificial intelligence, machine learning, virtual reality, new lighter materials, new ways of manufacturing, 3D manufacturing, and that all powered or accelerated by digitalization should certainly bring fresh wind under the wings of the aeronautic industry. I think we can, if we smartly use that, if we prepare that, and the time is now, I think that can bring huge efficiency gains also in terms of development times, manufacturing times, etc. Today we use up to 8 years to develop a large new aircraft. We spend a fortune, 12, 15 billion non-recurrings, pick your number. Usually it's a couple of billions more because we're over-optimistic in our industry. If that could be cut just by half, imagine what that would mean in terms of cost reduction and efficiency improvement.
The thing there, Tom, though, is that these technologies that you've just described, none of these are really core aerospace technologies. They're really core Silicon Valley technologies. So, who's going to be in the driving seat? Maybe you will reshape your industry but lose control of your destiny. Is that a risk?
Believe me, that's none of our concerns. I mean, we are fortunate that these technologies are developed or under development, and we will make best use of it as much as we can. We all understand now, as much of a non-aeronautic industry as well, that data will be at the core of our value proposition in the future. I'll give you one example. I mean, for the first time on a new program, we used advanced data analytics. I'm talking about 350 program. And I think that program is running relatively smooth in its critical ramp-up phase. Has a lot to do with the application of data analytics, reducing the concessions, reducing multiple problems that you usually run into in ramp-up phases. And it's just scratching on the surface as far as intelligent use of data is concerned in our industry.
Can I just add another example with Airbus is that, basically, as I understand, Airbus has both military and commercial customers. And one of the things that Airbus has is a large imaging platform, satellite images and so forth. And we've recently started working with that division of Airbus, whose name I can't pronounce, to analyze these things automatically. All of the satellite analysis was done by hand. And this is a very good example where computers can do it more accurately and so forth. But what's innovative was they're one of the first users of something called AutoML, which is a technology that we invented that will propose different candidate neural networks. And what we like about the partnership is they have a very complicated problem. It's very important. It's a great deal of data. So to answer your question, that's a very good example where a technology that we just invented in the last 6 months will become part of the value proposition. But it's run by Airbus, right? We're just a supplier to them, if you will.
There's a question we wanted to ask you both. Could the digital era lead to the emergence of new competitors like we've seen in space with SpaceX and Elon Musk? What do you think, both of you?
Well, absolutely. I mean, you're giving an example. A big mistake we made, the traditional aerospace industry, was underestimating SpaceX for all too many years. It was founded in 2004, and I think we didn't start to take it serious until 2012 or something. And I mean, some of the methods that they are applying are completely counter to our traditional philosophy, where we're trying to be 99% sure before testing something. And as you know, Elon was saying, hey, you know, I'll start with Falcon, 50% chance of success. I'll do it anyway, because if I fail, I learn a lot. And that overall will reduce my development time and reduce the costs, other than the traditional, much less risk-averse philosophy we've been doing. Now, we will not become a risk-prone industry over time, but some of these elements, I think, we certainly need to integrate into our businesses. And yes, there is a possibility in general terms, but if we do not grasp the importance of these new technologies, if we do not understand the driving force of data going forward, that we will be overtaken by new competitors, maybe by ones that don't have all this historical baggage and can leapfrog to a large extent the traditional industry. That's my concern a little bit.
Eric, Google a competitor?
Well, obviously not directly in this space. We want to be a technology supplier to the industry. I would offer the following conundrum. Everybody here wants human beings to always be safe, always be alive, always have a long life. If you write rules that require that, it's very difficult to take risks, right? And what happens in an industry is that the industry becomes extremely regulatory captured because of good goals, right, which are life safety and so forth. So you have to be willing to take risks with things which are not life safety related. I'll give you my favorite example is that in the 1950s and 1960s, America, and I don't know the history in Europe, but certainly in America, we launched many, many rockets, most of which failed. And through that failure, we learned how to build rockets that didn't fail. So now, if we launch a rocket and it fails, it's a national headline. But what we should be saying, if we care, and I'm talking about rockets without people in them, so not involving human life, we should say that in order to make better and better rockets, we want to have more failures. So we have more learning experiences. So the core thing that I think happens, I'm using that as an example. So the core problem that happens with software is once you decide you can't have any bugs, you also can't fix the current bugs and you can't add any new features, at which point you're stuck. And so finding a path through that, I think, is the joint problem that we have in America. I think we have that problem here in Europe. And what I would suggest as a discipline is that there are things which don't have to be perfect, where we can have rapid iteration. And there are things which have to be perfect, in which case there better be some people who are checking it and so forth, and they're different. And you want to know which one is in which category.
Actually, that's a very interesting point. I'm tempted to ask you, Tom, the aerospace industry, I think Airbus at the beginning wrote all its own software, very innovative software. And in any case, keeps enormous control over what it's doing. I mean, wouldn't it just be better to ask Eric's team to write all of this stuff directly. You concentrate on being the architects and putting it all together, but why do you need to pursue something that you're maybe not the world's experts at?
Well, you find me a little bit tight-lipped, but I would say that this is exactly the discussion we're having right now inside the company. We have been outsourcing and outsourcing and outsourcing, and we will outsource a lot of stuff in the future, particularly the aerostructures, obviously. Well, there's a debate, obviously, in the industry and in our company to what extent we need to beef up our software expertise. And the other thing is, I mean, we need to find the right balance between beefing up our own expertise, hiring more software people and data people, and on the other hand, partnering, smart partnering with people like Google and other companies to move forward. So it will still not be that we're going from one extreme to the other, obviously, but we need to find a new balance in this field.
I actually don't agree with anything in your question.
Okay.
And I'm sorry to say. I want Airbus to have as many great software people as possible because there's no hardware-only teams left in the world. All systems in anything, manufacturing, transportation, even the arts, are now combined hardware and software. And I want I don't know if you agree, because we haven't talked about this, but I want the software engineer at Airbus sitting next to the hardware engineer at Airbus in the entire design cycle from the conception. When you have the software people, and in particular software engineers who build systems, you conceive of problems differently. And in my industry, not aviation, we're going to begin to see small startups that are run extremely differently. Their sales forces don't survey customers. They measure what customers want. They learn what customers want. The technology is shifting dramatically the way you organize new intellectual property companies. And over time, I hope that technology will become part of the way Airbus and its competitors work. But my answer to the issues in Europe, of which there are many, and the issues in America, of which there are many, is more of an understanding of how fundamentally powerful software is. So with air traffic control, I mean, that number 10% is astounding. I just thought it was annoying, right? 10% is a massive number in terms of carbon contribution, et cetera, along with delayed time and so forth. Think of the efficiency. One of the ways in which you can get economic growth in Europe, which creates jobs, is getting things to happen faster. Imagine if people were moving faster, if there were more runways and more activity and so forth. If there's more economic activity through efficiency, you get greater economic growth, which benefits all the citizens of Europe.
As a matter of fact, Google is very good, we know, on data, on search, providing solutions to people. What are your projects in transportation, in mobility? Do you have any will to create the magic app that could lead us to have anything door-to-door transportation? And how far will you go with artificial intelligence in this area?
I think there's some limits to how far we want to go there. We are working very hard on self-driving cars. We have a subsidiary at Alphabet called Waymo, which is certainly the leader in the world on cars that will take you from point A to point B. I will tell you that I've been in these cars, and it goes from horror to boredom, right? So horror in the sense of who's driving, and to boredom, which is, it seems to be doing a pretty good job. We have measured how long this cycle goes, and it's 20 minutes. It takes the average human 20 minutes to go, okay, I'm safe, it's going to be fine. I think that if you think of the number of people who die every year on the highways of the world, it's more than 1 million people. Aviation, by the way, is incredibly safe compared to cars. That's a very high priority for us. That has nothing to do with the aviation side. We also have a very significant flight search capability. We bought a company called ITA in 2010, which has much of the flight booking and transportation information. And rather than going into the business directly, what we do is we provide the information, and then you can purchase the tickets from others. And that seems like a good compromise for us.
You mentioned the... Sorry, Tom.
Say something spontaneously, Tim. I'm very much encouraged by Eric's 20 minutes of adaptation time. We're thinking, obviously, a lot about autonomous flight. Be it short range, be it longer range. Yeah,
You're going to be the first guy in an airplane with no pilot?
Well, we will launch later this year. We launch a one-seater called Bahana, by the way, in San Jose, fully autonomous, and we're still looking for volunteers. Eric, you live nearby, so that should be. No, actually, I mean that autonomous flight will come. We have it in drones already, but also with passengers eventually. And if you think about it, and you know that very well, the requirements for autonomous driving are harder than for autonomous flying, because the tolerances that you need, or the low latency in connectivity for driving on the roads, I think is more demanding than it is for flight.
So it's actually worth going through the thought experiment, and this is just a thought experiment. This is not really going to happen. Imagine if one day there were only airplanes that were autonomously driven, there were no pilots in any of these airplanes. Would such a system work? Well, the answer is, technically the answer is yes, because all of the technology to do autonomy with respect to drones and collision avoidance is well understood. And every one of the airplanes that's in the sky, at least in regulated airspaces like in Europe, have ADS-B and other ways of knowing where they are. So assuming a reliable GPS system, and all the modern jets have backup to GLONASS and the European ones and so forth, it's reasonable to expect you could build such a system. I'm not arguing we should build such a system. I'm saying it's a thought experiment. So imagine, because you know where everything is, it should be possible to optimally schedule, right? So imagine that you had all the air routes, again, in one computer, one big computer with all the data. We wouldn't build this, but somebody else would in Europe. It'd be a great startup. You put all that stuff in one data, and you figure out optimal scheduling routing that optimizes throughput for passengers, revenue for the airlines, carbon emissions, or what have you. It's all technically possible now because of your vision.
Let's just talk about some of the cultural ways in which you organize your companies. Very different type of worlds. Aerospace has always been a very closed world, very highly regulated. You, of course, your industry embraces openness and a completely different type of culture. The problem is that they seem incompatible. I mean, aerospace is all about failure is just not an option. And yours is about constant iteration, trying, if it doesn't work, do it again, do it faster. Do you feel that there's some basic incompatibility there, or can you actually learn from each other?
Straightforward. We're learning a lot from tech companies right now. Because if you think about it, what's the biggest challenge? It's not the technology, actually. It's not digitalization. It's the mindset and the culture. I mean, I've said that publicly and self-critically when it comes to my company, manufacturing. We're still stuck in Taylorism. And that is not in the 1990s, even before. We need far more end-to-end responsibilities. We are currently experimenting in over 60 cases and sites with empowered organizations. And the results are very impressive. I mean, we can reduce layers of management. We can reduce absenteeism, big problem in manufacturing industry, in our cases, up to 50% reduction of absenteeism, productivity up by 30% by self-synchronizing, self-empowered groups. Okay, you probably can't apply it everywhere, but we are in the midst of a process of changing organization and culture at Airbus. And it's far too early to say that we will be successful. The resistance is strong, and it comes, not surprisingly, particularly from middle management, those people that think they have a lot to lose. And on those we need to focus to get the breakthrough in the organizational challenges that we need in order to make digitalization really, or realize the synergy potential that is in these new tools and in these new technologies. But it's interesting. A lot of people would have said, yeah, you can do stuff like that with the white collars, with the engineers, the development people, but not with manufacturing. No, we're starting with manufacturing. And the result is, as I said, very impressive.
The problem of revolutions, especially in France, is sometimes it cuts heads. You can lose your head. So what could be the impact of all this change, the digital age in your industry, on jobs, on the number of jobs, of the type of jobs? And don't you think you could have difficulties to implement it in the French culture?
Well, that's a very good question. What it really needs is a comprehensive approach, i.e. we at industry alone cannot be successful. That raises the question of the educational system. How are people educated? How are the universities organized? And I think it's become a truism that we have to go for lifelong learning rather than prepare people at our educational institutions for one job and then pretty much later find out that that job is probably disappearing, rather preparing people for different roles. Some people talk about nano-educational programs, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that is very important. And here in Europe, again, it requires not just a French, it requires a European approach. I would say pretty much all our educational systems that we have in that sense are outdated. So that requires a joint approach by industry and by the authorities, by the governments who are responsible for education.
Eric, when you look at Europe, how do you gauge Europe's ability to produce people for the software industries with the type of talents that you need in your industry? And will you actually, and Tom, be competing for the same people in this new world you're describing?
Well, we certainly compete for the top software people, and the good news is there's lots of them. So Europe has some of the greatest universities in the world. And what I do is largely math and science related. Again, we have great leadership in all the leading European countries. As I said earlier, the French are builders. As a country, you have great national pride in building real things at scale. So you have a long tradition at Polytechnic and other universities, of doing this. So we have a very large operation of engineers, many thousands of engineers who work for Google and Alphabet in all of Europe, who perform at equal or better than the American standard. There is not a talent problem. It is an organizational problem, right? And again, it has to do with the age of the industries, the regulatory structure, and so forth. When they built their latest airliner, they went to complete virtual design, and that saved, you said some number of billions of euros by using new tools. So that's an example of leadership. In their manufacturing process, they are now much, much more efficient in terms of parts and tools and so forth. So they're already doing that. The question is, can they now get to the next level using these new tools? And we would be happy to partner with Airbus to do that and with the other aviation as well. But the key thing is that Europe has the talent, but it's not organized to create enough of the technology startups. It's highly likely, for example, that there will be many startup software industries in aviation that will be in the different countries of Europe when the regulations allow for it. And that will provide an opportunity for young people who have different models to begin. The other comment I would make is that you always use the argument of life safety, but life safety for things which are unmanned, right, you have a different standard. But what about imaging and planning and systems and all of the rest of the value chain? Those are not life safety issues, and so they don't have to be regulated in the same way. They're regulated under a different set of regimes, and that should allow for more flexibility. My final comment is the aviation industry as a whole has product cycles getting longer and longer and longer. This is especially true in the military. You can speak about the European military structure, but in the American military, each design cycle takes longer. There are many reasons for that, and that's exactly the wrong thing happening. The design cycles need to be quicker, iteration cycles need to be quicker. The American model, which has worked so well for us, is called fast iteration. Try it, doesn't work, try it, it gets better, try it, it gets better, try it, it gets better. Right? And that's how we used to build things. An example from America is that Lockheed had a skunk works in the 60s and 70s that resulted in many of the early high-speed military airplanes. And they had an authority which allowed them to keep trying different things. And there was a particular colonel who was particularly heroic, who said, we're going to try this. Oh, that's terrible. Oh, you know, and so forth. And he kept trying. And we've lost that. And the reason I'm upset about it is, first, I think it'd be better if the product cycles were quicker, but also an enormous amount of citizens' money is wasted in these activities because of the amount of time. And I would assume the same is true in Europe.
By the way, I just figure that went through my head on this education thing. The World Economic Forum estimates that those children that are going to primary school today, 2/3 of them will finally exercise jobs that are not yet invented. Just think about it, and that gives you an idea of the challenge of our educational system. In our industry, who knew and who employed data analysts, data scientists just 5 years ago? Now we're trying to, find them like mad and competing. I mean, I see some of our competitors and partners sitting here. I think it's happening right now in many of the aerospace companies.
Where are you going to find them, Tom? I mean, it sounds as though you're not going to find all of them ones that you need in Europe, and perhaps you will be more dependent, and perhaps there's a great opportunity for you in emerging markets where a lot of these skills are being developed. Is that where you're looking now? China, India?
Yes, I mean, partially yes. We have engineering centers and data centers in these countries, but we're also lucky because we have thousands of highly intelligent, well-educated engineers. We retrain them, we reskill them. This is an effort underway at Airbus right now. We're talking about hundreds.
And I should add, by the way, I was just in China. China is very quickly going to become the global leader in engineering, just by scale. There's lots of Chinese compared to Europeans and Americans, and there's lots of smart Chinese, and there's a strong commitment to education. So even if we are happy with our current poor performance, right, my criticism, in America and in Europe, the Chinese will teach us a lesson. Their investment in technology, and in particular in software, will be massive. And that has a lot of implications for our leading industries, especially here in Europe and America.
Tom, there's two main drivers in the revolution you talk about. Digital, of course, but also the energetic transition. What about electric plane, pilotless, and maybe you could change the shape also. Maybe you could use 3D printing technology to build planes in the future. What will be the plan of the future with this revolution?
You remind me when I mentioned the trends that we are seeing at the beginning of our conversation, that I forgot electrification. Shame on me. That's obviously very important. We've been working on that since quite a few years. We're currently, our Chief Technology Officer, we're currently preparing a demonstrator that should work with 2 megawatts. That's ambitious, but we think we can do it in 2 to 3 years. And eventually, the goal should be that we should be able to drive at least single-aisle aircraft with electrical, with batteries or with hybrid propulsion systems. That's certainly some years off, but we are working and investing heavily on that because the advantage is obvious. I mean, just think about night flight restrictions and stuff like that, not to speak about the emissions, but that requires a lot of technologies converging right now, and we have strong partners here with whom we work on that. The other field is helicopters, rotary wing, urban air mobility. I'm a strong believer the time has come to seriously include the third dimension into mobility, particularly in large urban areas. In 1990, we had just 10 megacities. That is cities with over 10 million population. In 2030, the prediction is more than 40 of those. And there's a nice historical example I came across the other day. In 1898, the Times predicted that the traffic growth, which was horse traffic, would continue. That in 50 years, London streets would be under 9 feet of manure. Well, that shows something about the inability or the fallacy of extrapolating from one trend and predict the future. But we're doing a lot of things on the helicopter side as well. We have a couple of projects underway. I mentioned one, and I would be very surprised if not in 4 or 5 years or so we would see some big city in the world that would be testing, would have a full-fledged pilot on urban air mobility.
Eric, everybody in the world, even in the Silicon Valley in California, was very shocked about the decision of President Trump on the Paris Accord. And what did you hear what the President Macron said, saying all the searchers in the US you can welcome in France and you can make your study there. What do you think about this situation, and does it isolate the United States?
I loved what President Macron said, and I think he's going to be a fantastic leader for your country. This administration is moving backward in the U.S. on some things that are very important, of which COP21 is one of them. The good news is that the industries are going to continue to produce carbon reductions with or without government regulations. The simple math is that coal is too expensive. Natural gas and wind and solar photovoltaic are essentially at parity without subsidies, and that the intermittency of renewables can be solved by grid improvements. So the way this problem is going to get solved is that the industrial incentives, if you will, are going to cause American industries to remain competitive. There's no scenario where American business people are going to say, hey, we were just kidding about these new large renewable industries, because the president reversed a good decision by President Obama. And so I think America will remain a significant player here. Just so we're clear, it's very easy to understand. The globe is warming relatively quickly. It's much more expensive to act 20 years from now than now. So time matters, and this goes completely against normal political logic. But relatively small amounts of money now forestall much greater problems later. And if I was in Antarctica last year, and for technical briefings on this, there is a West Antarctic ice shelf that may fall in the next 100 years, which would result in the oceans being between 7 and 21 feet higher. So if you like Florida, you'll miss it when it's gone. And I'm sure that the same would be true of many of our most beautiful coastlines of France.
How quickly do you think, what's your vision for the next bet for transportation? We've heard about hybrid or electric power. I mean, could that solve a lot of these problems, be a big win for aviation in tackling climate change?
Well, again, the scientists I've spoken to on aviation say that kerosene, right, has such a high energy to weight ratio that for large passenger jets and freight, it's going to be a long time before we can use alternative fuels. You're the expert. I'll let you speak to that. But I think there are so many other ways in which we can make aviation more climate friendly, starting with the ATC world and the delays. People want to travel. I think it's good, more economic activity. We're in favor of all that. We just wanted to do it more efficiently from a carbon perspective. I think that's relatively straightforward. I think that what will happen over the next 10 or 20 years is travel will become much more common, much easier, and especially in Asia, where many of the population will be coming to the middle, into the sort of middle income areas. And they're going to want to travel too, which is where I suspect the majority of your future revenue will be.
Okay, do you want to go to questions? I think we're running out of time. Tom, did you see the pilot? Can I pick up on that topic then? Are we going to see a pilotless plane from Airbus? Perhaps designed, built by robots, flown without a pilot, guided purely by artificial intelligence. The only people involved in this will be the passengers. Is that how you see the future?
Well, certainly not the immediate future. But we are working on more efficient, I mean, that's the headline, more efficient aviation, safer aviation also in the future. And we just believe that those technologies we talk about and quite a few others are more than ever enabling us to move into that direction. So it's futile to predict exactly when will electrification of commuter traffic, helicopter traffic. We're working on it. We're pushing it, and there's so many actors. Also, new startups. I mean, just think about it. In the last 5 years, 240 new aerospace companies with a lot of innovative projects have sprung up. More than 5 billion was invested into this new ecosystem. So if that is not a revolution, I don't know what a revolution looks like.
Most people believe that the self-driving car revolution will be largely electric cars. It's technologically easier to have a self-driving car that has the electric motor and the electric actuators and things like that. So I think most of the energy will be there for pure electrification. And it's implied in your question that there's a job loss in that scenario. I think the data is the inverse. And I'll give you a simple argument. One of the great things about Europe is getting older, which means people are living longer. But one of the consequences of that is that the number of people who are working in their working ages is declining as a percentage. In order to fund the excellent lifestyle of Europeans, especially when they're retired, you have to increase the productivity of the working population. The same, by the way, is true in China, Japan. Japan's the worst, by the way, America, etc. It's not true in some developing countries, but it's true in all of the mature countries. The only solution is the use of software, automation, increases in productivity, all the things that we're talking about here. So in order to preserve, protect, and grow the economic base and the economic well-being of Europe, you have to go forward. You're not going to go back into being an agrarian society. It's just not going to happen. You're going to be building even more sophisticated mechanical devices, of which airplanes are an extraordinary example. And I should say, and I want to say in front of an aviation audience, that your safety achievements are the highest I've ever seen. Think about how rare an actual death is now in aviation compared to the inherent dangers of the system. You have done a fantastic job. Compare that to any other industry. So the question is now, holding on to those gains, right, which are real and you should be very proud of, how do you increase the rate of innovation?
Eric, maybe it could be the last question before, maybe if you have some question, we can take some in Zoom, but a lot of people are worried about the consequences of artificial intelligence in the future because nobody knows the limits. So my question is, do you know at Google the limits of artificial intelligence? And what can you say to reassure the public about and to give a more humanistic view of technology?
So I have a strong view on this, that at least for the next 10 or 20 years, this technology, which essentially makes people smarter, is completely beneficial for humanity. And the way to understand that is that for every challenge in the future, it would be nice if a person had a computer that could help them understand what their choices are, help them solve a problem, keep them happy in some interesting way. I was talking to my physicist friend who said that, I said, what is the biggest problem you have? And he said, There's so much physics now, I can't remember it all. This is the most brilliant person I know. There's literally so much physics. What I want the computer to do is just to watch all the physics and show me combinations that I have not thought about. What will this do? Well, in chemistry, that will lead to new biological solutions, new diseases, solutions for drugs. In material science, it leads to new materials that we have not thought about, which will make airplanes less expensive, lower weight, that sort of thing. There's a material revolution that's coming from this kind of technology. So in every industry I can look at, the arrival of this intelligence makes the industry more effective, more productive, which should lead to economic growth, which should lead to jobs growth. You can imagine 30 years from now, or 40 years from now, that these computers will somehow develop their own brain, they're going to run amok, they're going to have the four of us will be in some, house, and the computer will have locked all the doors and we can't get out and we're terrified. And by the way, that's called a movie, okay? It's a really good one, and if you want to make that movie, go to Hollywood, right? The odds of us getting that prediction right are 0. How many of you predicted the smartphone, the GPS, Uber, the apps, all of those things that we have today that people can't live without? None of us did.
Tom, for artificial intelligence, what is your view? Are you afraid about that?
What should I say? Here's the expert on artificial intelligence, but I feel very encouraged by what I heard today from Eric for the application in the aerospace industry. And I feel very encouraged, if anything, to accelerate the evolution of the industry towards more use of data and data analytics, more use of artificial intelligence, if that is available, machine learning, virtual reality. Electrification, as I said, is something that we are investing a lot of money right now. And some people talk about the next golden age of aviation. I'm a little bit careful about it. Golden sounds sometimes a little bit too golden with all the challenges that we still have in our industry, right? But there's every reason to be optimistic that if we get this right, and if we make good use, best use of the new technologies, and partner with the right people. By the way, I don't think it is that much about acquiring companies anymore. That was a big trend in aerospace, particularly 10, 15 years ago. It's much more about smart partnering with people and building up, as I said, the balance between what do I need inside and to what extent can I rely on the abilities of partners. If we get this, then I'm absolutely sure the future of aerospace and aviation will be bright.
Well, I'm afraid we don't have time for questions. Really, thank you very much. It was a brilliant conversation. You can come back when you want. Thank you, team.